Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today, can't even say my name, is Perry Marshall, the man, the myth, the legend. I love this guy. He is unbelievable. So Perry's one of the most expensive business strategists in the world. He's the author of 80/20 Sales and Marketing. He's written a bunch of books on advertising, one of which is The Ultimate Guide to Google Advertising. He's also written Evolution 2.0, a bunch of other books. If you're watching on the YouTube channel right now, you see a couple of those books in his backdrop amongst a bunch of others. Perry's also, he announced the world's largest science research challenge of over 10 million, or exactly $10 million, the Evolution 2.0 prize. Really, really smart, very humble, very generous. I mean, I think his book, it's gonna be a long intro. I think this book, 80/20 Sales and Marketing, should be required reading for any salesperson and any marketer. I've read it. I've read this book probably, I don't know, 5 to 7 times. We've had it as a company book club at least 2 or 3 times in our company history. Perry's been generous enough to come in and do a Q&A with the team as part of this book club. I mean, this is a great book. I can't speak highly enough about it, and just all around great person. So we're gonna have some fun today. He's also was on the podcast way back, episode 35, where we talked about some 80/20 sales and marketing stuff. And so we got a lot of fun stuff in store. Perry, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you for the intro, and thank you for having me. And I've watched your empire grow and grow and grow, and I'm really proud of you. And I'm just glad to be here today. And we're going to have a really fun, interesting conversation. I think we're going to go some directions that most people would not expect one of these conversations to go.
All right, that's what you told me before the interview. I'm like, I'm about to buckle up. I've got some questions, but we'll see where we go. I guess first is maybe the backdrop. Why are books such a big part of what you do? Even just like I'm looking at the history. I know you do multiple updated editions. You released a book this year. You released an updated edition of multiple books last year.
Yes.
Like, it just feels like there's always books coming out or updated editions. So why is this such a big part of what you do?
Well, in the marketing DNA test, which is part of 80/20 sales and marketing, we give people a tool to say, how is it that you persuade as opposed to other people? For years, I read all these sales books and, like, well, you should say this and you should do this, and it's a numbers game and you should call all these people. And a lot of that was good advice for some people, but it wasn't good advice for me. And some people are public speakers and they should just go out and they should woo the crowds and they should get the standing ovations, and that's what they should do. And some people should be making videos, and some people are writers. Okay. And if you're a writer and if your customers are readers, then you need a book. Now, if you own a construction company and your clients don't read anything, then maybe you shouldn't do a book. Like, I would never say that everybody should write a book, but some people are writers. And the reason that I write so many books is that my best customers are readers. And if somebody's read one of my books, so if they read 80/20 Sales and Marketing and they took the marketing DNA test and they went online and they got on my email list and they started getting the stuff, that person is usually a very, very good client. And I want to attract those people. And I do a lot of work in science. And in science, if you can't write, you don't know anything, right?
You can't get a paper published.
Everybody in science who's to be taken seriously publishes, right? And so writing is my wheelhouse. And if you get good enough and do all the stuff to write one book, then writing a second book is less of a big deal, and writing a third book is less of a big deal. Yeah. And now I've got 9 out. We've got another one coming out probably in January. It's Definitive Guide to YouTube Advertising.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because nobody's got a book on that that has done an adequate job. And so we want to be there. So So yeah, that's why books. And again, I don't think everybody should write a book, but if you're a writer and if your customers are readers, there you go.
That's great. I'd never thought about this till just now, but it's interesting how you obviously have a background as a copywriter, world-class copywriter, and then you have a background in science. And how you're saying to be in science, you have to be good at writing. That
Yeah.
I never connected the dots. I would guess that that's a big part of why you are great. What makes you a great writer is because you're able to pull from. Because when I think science, I think technical writing, and when I think copywriting, I think relating to the
Yes.
everyday person. And it's
Yes.
almost so. That's where I feel like is kind of your sweet spot, is the ability to communicate technical things in everyday language. Do you feel like that comes from those two backgrounds?
That is why I'm the best-selling author on Google Ads. I am explaining a highly technical topic to regular people who have to use this jumbo jet airline cockpit to go out there and get some leads. And I have to explain how it works in a way that they can relate to, and they have to get on the machine and they have to put copy in the ads that's good copywriting, right? You need the technical side.
Oh, yeah.
And you need the personal side. In fact, a story, when I was 20 years old, I was a junior in college, and I had an English professor. I was taking an English authors before 1800s class, and I had an English professor pull me aside and say, I would like to talk to you. I go, am I in trouble? No, I've been reading your papers and I have some observations for you. Okay. So I go into his office one day and I said, you said you wanted to talk to me. And he says, yes. He goes, you're an electrical engineer, right? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I've been reading your papers and you understand people. And he said, people are way more interesting than things. And engineers work on things, and you're a people person, and I can't figure out why you're an engineer if you understand this. And he wasn't insulting me. He wasn't saying English majors are better than engineers. That was not the point at all. In fact, he was one of the sharpest people I've ever met in my entire life. His classes were amazing. Every single class would blow your mind. He would connect dots that you had never connected. And he quizzed me for a while, and he's like, oh, so you understand things and you understand people. So, and you have this curiosity about how things work, and that's why you're in engineering. He goes, well, he said, most people either understand things and they don't understand people, or they understand people and they don't understand things. You understand both. He said, that is a very valuable skill. And he said, you would do very well in technical sales. And in fact, I think someday you'll be the president of the company. I had never heard anything like this ever in my life before. And then you take what he said, and 15 years later, I'm writing a book about internet advertising, how regular people can use a platform like Google, which is designed by a bunch of engineers. Like, I understood exactly what they were trying to get us to do. Most people didn't. Like, here, let me explain it. They want you to do this. They want you to achieve these objectives. Here's all the little shortcuts and hacks that'll get you there. And here's how to read all these columns and numbers and make sense out of them, even if, like, you were never an accountant, you were never an engineer, you were never a mathematician, like you do quilting and you're just trying to sell quilts or something, right? And so yes, putting those two together, and like all of the copy that I write is also logical. It's not just pushing your emotional buttons. There's a logical flow and an argument to it. But then I write scientific papers too. Like, I'm part of the scientific community, peer review and all that kind of stuff. And when I write scientific papers, I still have to adhere to the rules of science, which doesn't involve a lot of clickbait headlines, right? But I need to still communicate to the reader on an emotional level, even if they're not consciously aware that I'm doing that. And there needs to be a rhythm and a flow so that it's an enjoyable paper to read, and maybe even a beautiful paper, and not just a bunch of data.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. So, hey, I'm curious on this. You write a lot of, like, speaking of technical writing, like you write a lot of technical books, or books on technical topics, I guess I should say. So Google ads, TikTok ads, Facebook ads, you've got pay-per-click advertising, you've got Ultimate Guide to Local Business Marketing. You talked about YouTube ads coming up. How do you do that? How do you approach writing those books on a topic that is just always changing?
Oh, okay. So that's a great question. And here's how I do it. In fact, this is really core to how I do all of this. Though I do not look at it as though the topic is changing. So one view of Google's platform or Facebook's platform is, oh my goodness, it's changing all the time. Okay, that's true, but that's only true on the surface level. It's like saying the ocean is changing all the time. Yeah, it's also been there like for 3 billion years, right? And in fact, it might not look terribly different than it looked a billion years ago. What part of it doesn't change? Well, in marketing, the part that doesn't change is the stuff in scientific advertising by Claude Hopkins. There's a set of principles that do not change no matter what they did to the screen or the login or the menu or what features they've got, or however they change all that stuff. And I've never written my books with the intent that they're going to understand the software interface. I write the books with the intent that they're going to understand the principles behind the platform, that regardless of how their rules might change or their quality score algorithm might change, that I'm still following in the steps of Claude Hopkins. Claude Hopkins invented the coupon in the late 1800s because he needed a way to track advertisements in newspapers, who bought the soap from this ad versus this ad versus this ad. And he would have the stores, well, every time you give us one of these clipped coupons, we will give you cash. So we are paying you to help us track our advertising. And this is how they worked out the whole notion of direct marketing, 120 years ago. And so he wrote this book called Scientific Advertising. And like, from my point of view, it's like, oh, engineer figures how to sell stuff by newspapers and direct mail. That's what this actually is. And so we just moved it onto the internet. And so because of the way we write the books, those books usually last about 3 years before people start feeling like they're long in the tooth. And in fact, the first edition of the Google book came out in 2007. And if you went and you bought that version of the book and you used it now, it would be clunky and it would be difficult, but we are still telling you all of the same basic right things to do, even if the details are wrong. And so that's how we look at it. And I also looked at it like, they think I'm teaching Google advertising. I'm really teaching them direct marketing, which means if I do a good job at this, then they could go use LinkedIn, or they could do Instagram, or they could do Pinterest or whatever. And they're going to find that conceptually, it's not really all that different. And that way I've equipped my reader with something that will last much longer than his Google Ads account.
That's great. That's really great. So teaching on first principles, and it sounds like universal strategies, not in the weeds tactics.
Yes.
And you said with that, the shelf life, the shelf life is a lot longer than 3 years, but 3 years is when it sounds like people starting to feel like maybe they're it's a little bit dated. So I think that leads to multiple editions. And I've seen you do this with a lot of your books. I don't even know how many editions you're on with the Google Ads one. And then you've got multiple.
Six. Facebook is 4.
Yep.
I think all of the other ones are first editions. I get to this later. I have an Ethernet book and it's 3rd edition. So that's kind of a crazy story. In fact, you asked me what was your first book? And this was my first book. And it's called Industrial Ethernet, a Pocket Guide. Okay. And I don't think you've ever heard this story, Chandler, but and it's still in print, even though it came out 20 years ago. So here's the story behind this. When I was a scrapping 28, 29 years old, sales and marketing manager, tiny little company. I've got a wife and a couple of kids in diapers, and I'm up to my eyeballs in debt, and I'm just paddling as hard as I can. And I've got this job at a hardware software company, and I'm selling this industrial stuff. And my boss had a marketing consultant, a really smart guy named John Fox, John told him when Mike was approached by a trade magazine, they said, will you write us an article about industrial networks? John said, Mike, take it, like, do it. That's a really good idea. Just take it. I'm like, okay. And so Mike pounds out this article, and Mike is not a writer, and he hated every minute of it. And I would happen to be in Mike's office the day Mike finished the article, and he says, man, I am so glad I am done with this article. I hope I never write an article again. Like, it's done, it's out the door. He goes, I hated that so much, Perry. If you ever want to write a magazine article, I'll pay you $500 to do it. And I go, you will? And he goes, yeah, actually I will. I don't ever want to do that again. It's a good thing to do. I just don't want to do it. And I thought, I could do that. I'm making what, $60,000 or $70,000 a year, $500, one article a month. Man, that's like half my mortgage. Okay, I'm in. And so I started writing magazine articles, and the editors liked them. I was a good writer. Well, one day I get this phone call, and this guy says, hi, my name is Matt. I'm from the ISA, and we own this magazine that you write stuff for, and we have a book division, and we are looking for somebody to write a book on Ethernet. And I go, well, I don't really know Ethernet, but I know this other network called DeviceNet, and I know this other one. How about a book on those? And he goes, well, the readers aren't asking for a book on those. They want an Ethernet book. And I said, well, I don't know Ethernet that well. And he goes, well, I really like your writing, and if you want to do the research and figure it out and write the book, I'll give you the book contract because I like what you do. And I sort of alter egoed my marketing gurus, in my head. And I think most of them would tell me that this is a good idea, even though this is like a giant pain in the butt. And I said, okay. And so I spent 6 months figuring out how Ethernet works so I could write an Ethernet book. And then I wrote this book called Industrial Ethernet, a Pocket Guide. And this is a niche, tiny niche market. I mean, these books sell for like 80 or $100 a piece, and only certain engineers and certain kind of industries would ever buy these things. I'd be surprised if this is sold more than, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 copies if I'm lucky. And I certainly didn't do it for the money, but it is the first book ever written on industrial Ethernet, first to market on a niche topic. And it did get me clients. When I hung out my shingle as a marketing consultant, companies that sold Ethernet stuff were like, I'm hiring that guy because he understands this crazy stuff. There's tons of marketing consultants, but they don't know anything about this technical stuff. I'm hiring one that understands what we actually do. One client, they probably paid me $250,000 of fees over a period of 3 or 4 years. And so it was very much worth it. Well, that's not the punchline, okay? That was certainly worth doing, but here's the crazy punchline. So in 2004, I go to China to visit my brother, who's a missionary teaching English. And he I get in a conversation, and he goes, you know, Perry, I don't really believe this Christianity thing anymore. And I'm about to be done being a missionary, and I'm about to move back to the United States, and I'm done being a Christian already now. And we're both pastors' kids. So this is a bit of a shock. And we get in an argument, and I go, Brian, look at the hand at the end of your arm. This is a nice piece of engineering, and I'm in engineering. I should know. You don't think this is a random accumulation of accidents, do you? And he goes, hold on. And he comes right back at me with this kind of canned, like, I think everybody's had this argument somewhere in their life. Like, did it evolve through some random chance, or did God did it? This is the argument that we're having. And it stalemated really quick. And I thought, you know what? I don't know much about this. And I know a lot of biologists would agree with him, not me. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to figure this out. And I'm going to stop arguing with my brother, because we're making ourselves miserable anyway. I don't think we're going to solve this today. And so I stopped arguing with him, and I went home and I hit the books, and like half the books behind me are there because of that conversation. And they're all about biology and genetics and all this kind of stuff. And I was lost. I was like, I have never studied biology in any detail before. This is the most complicated subject ever. How does a cell work? Oh my goodness. That's more complicated than how does New York City work, right? And so I was lost. And then a couple weeks later, I was like, wait a minute. I've seen this before. And I realized that the rules of genetics are the same as the rules for Ethernet. And I mean in the technical sense of how the math works and all of that. It was like, wait a minute, I understand this. And a year later, I was giving talks on this. And I gave this talk at a large megachurch called, If You Can Read This, I Can Prove God Exists. And I was saying that all codes are designed, therefore even the genetic code is designed. And so there's evidence of a divine spark in the universe. And this got me drug into the largest atheist discussion board in the world at the time. And it was me defending myself, one of me and dozens of them. I was ridiculously outnumbered. And I had only one piece of academic credibility. It was like a really thin thread that I could put my stake in the ground and say, I actually know what I'm talking about. And that one piece of credibility was, I wrote an Ethernet book for an industrial and technical society, which prints academic literature. And I know about ones and zeros, and genetics is ones and zeros. And this is the one tiny little piece of scholarly street cred. They didn't care about my Google books or anything like that. That didn't mean anything to anybody. But I had done this. Well, one thing led to another, led to a book called Evolution 2.0, led to me announcing the world's largest technology prize for basic science research, which is $10 million at the Royal Society. And when I went to the Royal Society and told my story, and it's on video, I held up this book and I said, it all started with ones and zeros. And like, who could have possibly conceivably imagined when I said yes to the editor of like the book acquisition editor of this industrial society, that 20 years later I'd be at the Royal Society of Great Britain, which is the oldest scientific organization in the world, announcing a science prize. And so this was a credibility game, if there ever was one. In fact, science, I think, Chandler, I think you'd be very fascinated to hear this. people think of science as a cold, clear, black and white, objective, it either works or it doesn't, proof-based profession. And in theory, it is. But there's a problem. And the problem is almost any scientific experiment that gets done now, anywhere, any university, any city, any state, anywhere in the world, is so complex and so subtle and understood by such a small number of people that even other professional scientists mostly have to take each other's word for it. If an organic chemist says something about organic chemistry, a physiologist does not have the expertise to know whether he's telling the truth or not. He has to rely on publishing, street cred, number of papers, number of grants, how many letters behind their name. That's how they judge you. So in a sense, science is a more subjective field than you buying groceries at the grocery store. Like when you buy a can of beans, you open the beans, you can see what the beans are, and everybody understands what beans are. But if you see a press release about the latest Nobel Prize or something, you don't have any ability to know whether that's legit or not. It's not a can of beans. So science is marketing. Science, almost
interesting. I see what you're saying.
Almost everything that you and I call science is really marketing.
Yeah, because you have a hypothesis. Do you do a test? You see the data, then you have a level of confidence in that test, one way or the other, but it's still kind of subjective. You're still deciding, okay, based on this, what do we test next?
Yeah, but it's based on you believing the person who ran the test.
And believing the data that the test produces. Yeah.
Hardly anybody actually looks at the data.
Yeah.
There's most scientific papers, there's only 45 people that read it and understand it. And probably only 10 that ask any questions about the actual data.
Yeah.
Right.
Same with marketing, right?
Right. And all of the biggest problems in science are marketing problems. They're not science problems. They're cultural problems, right? Like, I think a really mature, like if a bunch of scientists listen to this, the average scientist would be really agitated and irritated at what I said. The very best scientists would all nod their heads and go, yeah, he's right. Because that's what's really going on.
And that's interesting. It's interesting, just overlaying the parallels to my world of marketing and of books. It's interesting because there's a lot of things that are part science, part marketing. And why does a book, and so maybe that's a segue to this question, like, which of your books have sold the most and why? Because even that's part art, part science.
Sure. Well, the number one is the Google Ads book, which is in its 6th edition. So that's
which, do you guys wipe clean? Do you do a new listing every time you do a new book with that one?
You mean on Amazon? Well, I believe you have to. Back in the day, they would link together, but now, at least last I checked, Amazon makes you start over, which is another reason why we only do them every 3 years.
Yes.
You don't want to start over every year.
And why not leave the old editions up? Just like, hey, we're not going to sell them anymore.
Or... Well, they're still there, but I mean, I'm talking from the standpoint of like reviews and all of that. You start from zero every time you do a new edition.
Yes. That's why I'm just looking at reviews on your books, and it's, 80/20 sales and marketing has 875, ultimate guide.
So that
one, 200.
That one is the same book that we released in 2013. In fact, the publisher asked me if I wanted to do a 2nd edition. I said, absolutely not, because I'll have to start over, and I don't want to start over. I wrote that book to be evergreen. In fact, 80/20 sales and marketing I don't think more than 5% of that book will be out of date 10 years from now. I deliberately wrote that book to not go out of date. There are little bits and pieces that are dated, but very little. And that's the number 2 selling book, and that's sold about 3/4 what the Google book has.
Got it.
And as a business book, that's the one that I'm most proud of.
Is 80/20 sales and marketing?
Yeah.
And can you just, I know we're near the end of our time together. Can you just briefly, man, it's such a big question, but the 80/20 sales and marketing concept on a whole, how would you explain that on a napkin to an author, and like how they can apply that principle?
Well, first, I just want to say there is hardly anything that will benefit your life more than a deep understanding of 80/20, because it applies to everything. It is all around you, every minute of the day. And I'm not joking. The 80/20 principle says that 80% of what you get comes from 20% of what you do, and 20% of what you get comes from the other 80% of what you do, which means really that the effective stuff is 16 times more effective than the ineffective stuff. And it's not equal, it's ridiculously unequal. And not only that, there's a top 20% of the top 20% that's still 80% of the 80%. And then there's a top 20 of the top 20 of the top 20. So what does that mean? That means it's basically a law of physics that one author like Stephen King is going to outsell almost all other horror genre authors in the world. It's not some unfortunate byproduct of capitalism or something like that. It's how the world works. And you're either harnessing inequality or you're a victim of it. Like you're either consciously on the right side of it, or you're unconsciously getting ripped apart by it. And so it's an incredibly powerful tool. And I've had so many customers that are like, they read that book and they go, oh my word, I see it now and I can't unsee it. It's everywhere. How did I miss this before now? If you read the reviews of my book, you'll see it again. People say, I'll never look at my customers the same way as I did before ever again. So it means that if you write 10 books, 2 of them are going to outsell the other 8, guaranteed. It means if you have 10 customers, 2 of them are going to outspend the other 8, guaranteed. But when you accept this, now you're living in the is world instead of the should be world. And it becomes easier to make money, easier to sell the things that want to sell. You stop trying to sell the stuff that doesn't want to sell. You realize there's natural forces in the world that you just harmonize with, and life gets easier. It doesn't have to be bitter, awful slog. And I think most education teaches people to go through a bitter, awful slog, and they just
I'm going to lightning round with a couple final questions that I'm really curious on. So you've sold that 80/20 sales and marketing book for a penny for a while
and
now.
I still do. Yes.
So still do. So a lot of people do a free plus shipping funnel. You're the only one I've ever seen that's done it for a penny. And why? What's the why behind that? And has it worked? Does it convert well?
So the reason why we do the penny plus shipping is because I knew that I didn't really feel like I could test all of the ways that I might try to sell that. And I decided to copy the Columbia Record and Tape Club from 30 or 40 years ago, where you would open the Sunday newspaper and you'd see an ad. It would say, get these 12 albums for 1 cent. And there would be an asterisk and it would say plus shipping and handling. And then you would fill out this thing, and you look at all the titles, and you'd fill out the albums and send in the card, and your albums would come. And they tried all kinds of stuff over years. And the one that worked the best was charging even a tiny little amount of money for it rather than making it free, because it seemed more valuable. So I said, well, I'm going to copy that. And we've now been running that. I think we've been running it for 9 years. If you go to sell8020.com, you can buy 80/20 Sales and Marketing for 1 cent plus $6.99 shipping and handling. So you're buying the book for $7. Now, I'll tell you a dirty little secret. That's about what we pay the publisher for the book on a huge volume discount. So you literally are paying the wholesale price, and we are paying the shipping, which means we are taping dollar bills to the book. But here's what I found. So you remember the 80/20 rule? That 80% of the sales would come from 20% of the people. Well, we have upsells in the shopping cart. 78.2% of the people only buy the book, do not take the upsells. 21.8% of the people take upsells and buy extra stuff. So I tape dollar bills to 100% of the books so that 20% of the people will go buy something else and something else. We have extra videos, extra courses. They're all worth the money. They're incredibly worthwhile. We give people incredible value. And we have 800 reviews on Amazon on top of all of that. So that's why we do that.
That's great. That's awesome. Hey, what would be your parting piece of advice, knowing what you know now, to the Perry of, I guess, 20 plus years ago, before you wrote that Ethernet book, and all the other Perrys out there who are thinking about writing their first book?
When I was a young sales guy in the mid 1990s, there was zero apparent or obvious role for a writer to sell something. Like I get laid off from my job, I go hunt around, I get a job as a manufacturer's rep, and my job is to go make cold calls and go see people and get purchase orders, right? And I remember during that time, I sent out a Christmas letters, and one of my friends said, Perry, I read your beautiful Christmas letter. You're in the wrong profession. And I just laughed. Yeah, well, you can't make any money as a writer. What I didn't know was, if you take off your sales hat and you put on your marketing hat, you make lots of money as a writer. Writing is a lucrative profession, namely copywriting. Or what's copywriting? Copywriting is writing to sell. And you can write to sell industrial software or cranes or coffee or anything, right? And what I eventually figured out about myself is, dude, you're not a sales guy. You're a copywriter. In fact, you're an author writer. You're a technical writer. In fact, you explain technical marketing to people who aren't technical. That's what you should be doing. And when I look back at that sales job, I was always trying to educate customers about technology, and I was always trying to consult and be the expert and do all this missionary work. And it was square peg, round hole, bologna sandwiches, ramen soup, debt, credit cards, poverty, ramen noodles, baked potatoes and salsa. You know, baked potatoes and salsa is like really cheap food. Like that is the cheapest food that I know.
Oh my gosh, your analogies are I think it's how you relate and how you connect technical writing, because just even long in the tooth, when I first hung out my shingle as a market, like just all the little turns of phrase that are, I think, and I even think the 80/20 sales and marketing of racking the shotgun of, the three-star book with no 3-star reviews, and just like all of these kind of analogies and metaphors and,
Yes. Yes.
all that. It's
Yes.
it makes it entertaining and fun. So I appreciate that about you, Perry.
Isn't language like just the most fun thing in the world? Like, I know that's not everybody's, but if you're a real connoisseur of words, words are just the most amazing world, right? And I want to say this: there's people listening to this that should not write a book because you are not words people. You don't love words. You're not in love with verbs or whatever. Maybe you should make YouTube videos or something. Like, there's no law that says that you have to write a book, or like that a book is the be all end all. But if it's in your gifting and if it's in your wheelhouse, you might, 20 years from now, you might be like me and your 10th one is about to come out.
Hey, and if your gifting is videos and you want to do YouTube stuff, then check out that new book that's coming out in January.
Yeah, absolutely. Go buy it.
Guide to YouTube ads.
Definitive Guide to YouTube Ads. It should be out at the beginning of 2023.
Awesome. Well, Perry, that's a great segue into this, which would be just where can people go to find out more about you, to buy your books, all that good stuff?
Go to perrymarshall.com and sign up. No, sorry, scratch that. Go to sell8020.com. Buy my 80/20 book for 1 penny and just see what happens next. And just watch the machine turn.
Yeah.
We've put that in place. We've designed that over years. And like, if you belong in our world, something's going to hook you. And if you don't like it, then just forget it, unsubscribe, no problem. But the 80/20 book will change your life. It'll change the way you see everything. It'll make, I tell people who have jobs, I say the number one reason why you should become a freelancer is that you can 80/20 your work. You can get paid for 100% of it, but not have to show up for 40 hours if you can figure out how to do 15 hours and be 3 times as productive. You get 45 hours of work done in 15 hours and take the rest of the week off. That's why you should be a freelancer.
That might have been where I learned. Before I dropped out of school, I started hiring people on Upwork to do my papers and projects. I'm like, did I learn that from this book?
Perhaps.
Cannot confirm nor deny. Perry, you're the man. I appreciate you. This was awesome.
Thank you. It's always great to talk to you. Always look forward to it. I knew it would be fun. Thanks.
Well, hey, sell8020.com. Check it out. Grab the book for 1 penny. And like you said, see the marketing machine at work as well. As I always tell people, go buy it for a penny because you're going to learn a lot from the book, but then you're going to learn from the process of how you bought the book, exactly. Which might be, for some people, that's the biggest learning. So I was about to say it might be more than you'll learn in the book, but I don't think so. Thank you, Perry.
Thank you, Chandler. Take care.